Welcome to the Economy and Politics Show. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will be looking at the Budget 2023 State of States report launched recently as we look at the conversation around developments in sub-national level in the country. Joining me virtually to discuss pathway to sustainable economic transformation in Nigeria focus on states is Mr. Iniobong Usen, Head Policy Advisory and Research Budget. It's nice to have you on the program, Mr. Iniobong.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. I know that we had this conversation last year when you launched the 2022 Budget State of State. So it's good to look at the progress so far. But first, of course, I must commend you on the report launch. And of course, it was attended by the chairman of the Nigerian Governors Forum and governor of Kwara State, Governor Abdulrahman Abdulrazak. That shows that you're beginning to have that collaboration and that buy-in of governors, which is very important when you do things like this. So from your reports, the cumulative revenue of 36 states grew from 5.12 trillion naira to 6.6 trillion naira in 2022. It also pointed out that the reliance of states on transfers from the federal government increased from 58.4% in 2021 to 61.45% in 2022. Now, if states are making more money from internal generated revenue, why are they more dependent on federal government transfers?
So with our methodology, we often consider three primary components of the total revenue of states. So these are federal transfers from the federal government, which constitutes their statutory allocation, VAT, and for states that are rich in minerals and benefit from the 13% derivation, that would also form part of federal transfers. Then for things like Paris Club refunds, and some other federal government support, that's, all these would often comprise the federal transfers. Then you have your internally generated revenue that is made up of your tax and non-tax revenue. And the third component is your aids and grants. So looking at these three components, it's possible that aggregately, the total revenue would have increased. It's also possible that aggregately, the internally generated revenue would have increased, but it's also possible that the rate of the increase in maybe federal transfers, right, would be more than the rate of the increase in the internally generated revenue, meaning that your federal transfers as a percentage or as a fraction of your total revenue, year on year would increase. So it's just looking at the rate of increase amongst the three components. That's why you would see that despite the fact that the IGR increased marginally, if you look at federal transfers, you would see that the rate of increase in the federal transfers was more than the rate of increase in IGR, meaning that the states now had to rely more on federal transfers as a fraction of their total revenues than the IGR, as the case may be.
Last year we had this conversation and you said it's important for states to show that level of capacity for domestic resource mobilization. Do you see that improve in this latest report?
I mean, if you look at the numbers, if they have increased their dependence on federal transfers, it means their capability to mobilize revenues domestically has, relatively been weakened, meaning that they are more exposed to external shocks. So if it happens that there are cuts in the production of oil or the price of oil tanks, it means that the receipts, that would often find their way into the federation account would significantly reduce, which would also impact what eventually goes to the states. If there are pandemics, like it happened in 2020, when, there has to be a shutdown in the economy or very specific aspects of the economy, that contributes to the federal purse, is somewhat affected, it means that these shocks would be transferred to the states. So it's important that, states win themselves off this dependence on federal transfers such that when these external shocks do happen, right, there are buffers internally, to be able to address the really important basic needs of the state, whether it's salaries, whether it's service delivery with health, education, and just to improve the general standard of living of the citizens of their states without recourse to the transfers from the federal government that would often come, as the case may be.
Okay, so we just hope that we will see much more efforts by states in this regard, because it's very important to see more activity. I've seen several states trying to do some things, investment activities, investment promotion. Let's see what happens in that regard when we look at the 2024 State of States report. But something that really caught my attention was the human capital development component, where it was reported that 9 states exceeded the UNESCO recommendation of allocating 20% of annual budget to education, which is quite commendable, while 17 states spent 15% of their total expenditure on education. And then for healthcare, Jigawa and Sokoto states in the Northwest, I was quite surprised, emerged as the only 2 states that surpassed the Abuja Declaration of spending 15% of their total expenditure on improved healthcare delivery. So for you, is this an improvement from previous reports that states are really taking human capital development seriously? And is this an encouragement that several other states should now take on board and really invest here? Because IMF, experts, several analysts have said the pathway for Nigeria is invest more in human capital development.
It's even more interesting that, because for this aspect of the report, we looked at actual spending. The conversations around health and education spending are usually with budgetary allocations. But it's useful that we looked at the actual spending, because that's what tells you exactly the position of things as regards how government has deployed resources to these specific areas. Now, studies have shown that there's a very strong correlation between investments in health, investments in education, and economic growth. They have shown that for countries that have had better health outcomes, better educational outcomes, right, they have had considerable increase in economic growth, as the case may be. If you look at Nigeria's, human development indicators vis-a-vis our GDP per capita, you will see that we've observed, some stagnated growth over the years, on both, indicators. And so if we are going to begin to see increases or, very robust economic growth measured by GDP per capita, because another problem now is that population growth is outpacing economic growth. So meaning that, that's eroding, some of the gains that you would have had with economic growth. So it means that the economy has to grow at a faster pace than the population, so that we can fully realize the gains of the growth. Coming back to the health spending, education spending per capita, I would like to reference a state, Ondo State. Last year, looking at the education and health spending per capita, Ondo was at the bottom, for both indicators, with less than 400 naira, per capita on health and education. And I know that after that report was released, the Ondo State government had reached out to, sort of explore areas, for improvement, recommended direct recommendations to remedy that, anomaly as they had considered it to be. And we had several meetings in that regard. And we were so happy to see that moving into 2022, the stats had significantly changed. I mean, for health per capita, it had increased to over 2,000 naira per person. Education per capita, it had increased to over 5,000 naira. This was significant progress from the previous year, which also, denotes that the states are paying attention to these statistics. Now, how that translates into improved educational outcomes or health outcomes for citizens, right, is a different conversation entirely. It would mean that, the monitoring and evaluation framework, for measuring performance across the different indicators would need to be strengthened. We need to be able to see on the ground, that less children living beyond their fifth birthday, that pregnant women or women are not lost to childbirth, that vaccination coverage across board, is so much that every child that is born is able to access vaccines, that, helps the child against vaccine preventable diseases. That health insurance coverage, is so much that the out-of-pocket expenditure for health, which is currently at 77%, is reduced to the barest minimum, and that health is something that every citizen, can afford. Until these, spendings begin to translate into improvements across these different indicators I've mentioned, you cannot truly say that the states have done well. But I mean, it's commendable that we are beginning to see on paper that more resources are deployed in these, respective areas.
I agree with you in the area of the health insurance coverage is very important. And of course, improving healthcare investments and delivery for pregnant women, and of course, child mortality rates, and increased enrollment for children, because we need to address our out-of-school children index, which is very, very alarming. But let's look at something else that, of course, is concern. I put it even personally on my social media platform. I said the cost of living is increasing, the cost of doing business is increasing, but the cost of governance, why can't we reduce it? But that's a concern for another day. From your reports, the concern is that the cumulative personnel costs for 36 states grew by 13.44% to 1.75 trillion naira in 2022 from 1.54 trillion naira in 2021. Overhead costs also grew by 23.42% to 1.34 trillion naira in 2022. I've looked at this and also considered the fact that, yes, inflation has been spiraling. Currently, inflation is 26.72%. I would like to know, how can states handle this whole inflation creep in the management of public resources and personnel?
One of the root causes of budget credibility, budget credibility is simply, telling you the ability of states to accurately, and consistently project, their revenues and expenditures, right? Is that they are usually very faulty projections as regards revenues, inflation, because when states, are putting together their budgets, when they are planning their budget for the year, there are very, very key assumptions that they would often forecast to guide how they,
prepare their budgets,
their revenues, and plan their expenditures. Now, when those assumptions or those fundamentals, are faulty from the beginning, it impacts your ability to either raise revenue or spend. So it's important that with states and the federal government, because a lot of time they draw signals from the federal government in terms of setting the agenda for these fundamentals. It's important that states try to, as much as possible, right, project, these indicators with the realities on ground. We've seen that year in, year out with regards to inflation, states would often project what the inflation for the year would be. And of course, this would greatly impact your expenditure, as the case may be, because prices that you would have estimated for certain goods and services, might be far different from the market costs when you are eventually deploying resources, giving out contracts, for people to provide these goods and services. For that to be reduced to the barest minimum, it's important that when you're planning your budgets, you look at figures that are really close to the realities on ground, and it's not just wishful thinking, as we see sometimes with planning in this regard. But with specific reference to the increase in operating expenses, we expect that there should be more increases, because as it is, not all the states have even implemented the national minimum wage. About 15 states have not implemented the minimum wage, meaning that a lot of states are still paying, wages below what the standard requires. And with these current conversations around, the increase in minimum wage and, the federal government, making an additional 35,000 to federal government workers across board, we expect that some states that are a little bit more financially buoyant would take the cue, to also add some increases. Then, of course, you would expect that, that would have a, an upward effect on the personnel cost, as the case may be. Then for specific recruitments as well, I mean, we've heard that across board, there's a gap with regards to healthcare personnel, due to the Japa syndrome. In a lot of health facilities, across board, whether it's at the tertiary, secondary, or the primary level, there's, requirements for the recruitment of health personnel. When that happens, you expect that also that adds to the personnel cost. So, I mean, looking at the personnel costs vis-a-vis the services that need to be delivered to citizens, I don't see a problem with the personnel cost increasing. Where we have a problem with is with the overhead costs, right? In this day and age, with the advent of technology, we need to be more efficient with spending to be able to create fiscal space, create more revenues for you to now deploy to, your capital expenditure related items. It's important that we reduce, the cost of, running government, as the case may be, which, I mean, personnel cost also forms part of it, but overhead cost also to a large extent, contributes to that cost of running government. So government has to be more intelligent, with how it deploys resources to running government. And so we are not happy that 13 states, still grew their overhead expenditure, overhead costs by more than 40%. So states need to check that. For a state like Cross River, I think they grew theirs by more than 100%, 139%. That does not augur well for the states. It means that a large chunk of your budget that should have gone to your capex is what you are expending on your overhead cost.
Very important. In 30 seconds, Mr. Iniobong, the 29th edition of the Nigerian Economic Summit. And as a roundup today, the conversation, of course, there will be discussions around states. What are your expectations in terms of recommendations on what must be done to drive sustainable economic transformation and inclusion in Nigeria at the subnational level?
It's clear that we're in dire straits. States need to look inwards to see how they can, improve their ability to attract or mobilize revenue, as the case may be. And what that means is because the private sector, is the entity within an economy that drives growth. So to be able to promote activities in the private sector, it's important that you improve the ease of doing business. And the ease of doing business connotes a number of indicators across board. So you're looking at infrastructure. What's the state of road infrastructure? If you look at one of the contributory factors to inflation, especially as it regards food inflation in Nigeria as it is today, has been, the cost of transportation for food items. You realize that it has become more difficult for you to transport food, whether from the middle belt or the north to the south, for two reasons. One, bordering on taxation, but more importantly, even the road infrastructure, that is supposed to, ease the transportation of food from the farms where they are produced to the areas where they are consumed. I saw a video the other day where about 3 or 4 trailers, huge trailers carrying food items, fell on the road because of bad road, and they were carrying perishable items. Now, tens of millions worth of perishable items, food, had to perish on, on the way being transported to where they were going to be consumed. That cannot continue to happen, meaning that things like road infrastructure, right, needed to ease the transportation of items or commodities, as the case may be, are areas where governments need to deploy resources to. If you are looking at power infrastructure for our small and medium scale enterprises, the barbers, whether it's the welders, whether it's the tailors, whatever, people that need power to be able to power their small business, especially in the light of the fact that the alternative source of energy, being fuel, right, has become very expensive for the average consumer. So for things like areas like power, where that would significantly reduce the cost of doing business to the average person, and the person is able to increase their margins in terms of profit and pay more taxes, to government, are areas where government needs to deploy resources. For digital infrastructure, that's also an area. With this day and age where a lot of businesses are done online, where, a lot of learning is done online, it's important that the right digital infrastructure, is created both for businesses and for individuals to be able to access or, explore the full potentials of the internet age. If you now come to multiplicity of taxes, also I saw a video where somebody was transporting a commodity, across different states, and the person had to pay for 75 stickers. What do you think happens at the end of the day? That person transfers that cost to the consumer. And that is what also contributes to inflation at the end of the day, because whoever is doing the business at the end of the day needs to make, his profits at the end of the day. So all of these things with regards to taxes or the ease of doing business needs to be significantly addressed. Then at the top of it all, security. If you have all of this addressed and people do not feel safe, whether in a place to either do business or to engage in any economic activity, it means that all of that investment would have gone to waste, because nobody wants to be there. I'm aware of specific local governments, even down south in some states in this country, where people have deserted because of the, security challenges around those places. So we really need to find a lasting solution to the insecurity for, to be able to attract, whether it's domestic capital or foreign capital, to set up industries in these areas, to be able to employ people and pay taxes to the states. So these are areas where I think the state governments should really focus on moving forward.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iniobong Usen. You've mentioned the need for states to really focus on ease of doing business. You mentioned the need for states to watch their overhead costs. You mentioned the need for states to improve monitoring and evaluation, especially in expenditure and how it gets across to health and education. You also talked about the need to really take domestic resource mobilization effectively, and also the need for states to once again look at how they can improve the environment for investments to unlock opportunities in the economy. So thank you very, very much. Security also is a very important thing, and I know that that's between federal government and states. But thank you very much, Mr. Iniobong Usen, Head of Research and Policy Advisory Budget, for your insights on pathways to sustainable economic transformation in Nigeria. We are focusing on states. It was a nice interaction with you, and keep up the good work on budget as you continue to look at what subnationals are doing. And of course, your innovation tracker, we like what it's doing, and we hope you continue to track more projects as we look at them. Thank you once again for the time.
Thank you very much, Otto, for the platform. We're appreciative. Thank you.
To our viewers, just a note. Earlier this year, the Nigeria Hydrological Services Agency warned that the country would experience severe floods in 2023. There was an earlier warning. The Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Elevation also noted that the number of states at risk would be about 13. One of the major factors was the opening of the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon between August and October. We're in that period, and the effects are already hitting areas like Isheri in Ogun State, where estates are now being submerged with flood. States like Kogi, Benue, Taraba, Yobe, Gombe, and Adamawa are also affected. Heavy rainfalls this year also, as predicted, have also increased flooding in Lagos, Bayelsa, Anambra, Rivers, amongst other states. Last year, the country lost over 600 citizens, while 4.4 million people were affected, including the agriculture sector. It has become a recurring decimal and it needs proactive steps to address it. This is why we call on the federal government and states to once again take 2 quick steps. One is to construct at least 3 major dams between now and next year, August 2024, and also aggressively tackle issues of drainage and building on canals across the country. The big question is, what is the ecological fund being used for? Why can't it be leveraged to address these issues? This is a major concern, and we need governments at subnational level and federal to collaborate to address this. To all of you, our viewers, you can get further insights on the Budget 2023 State of State reports by visiting our ProShare website displayed on the screen and following our social media platforms also on WebTV. Till we come your way again, enrich yourself with the knowledge of socioeconomic developments around you, because it's the wise thing to do. I'm Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.